Welcome to a new episode of the Give, Receive, Improve podcast with Lisa Lam and Sawana Ali. In this episode, we will be focusing on two key attributes, namely discipline and diligence, and how discipline and diligence wins over talent every time. The two key questions that we want to answer are one, talent or strength is great, but what is discipline and diligence? And how can we develop those? Number two, how can you encourage, support, and develop discipline and diligence within your teams? So let's get going. So as we all know that a lot has been said about talent, and all of us, really admire people that have great talents, whether it's in athletics, whether it's an artist or a musician, or anyone that, shows a skill that we think that we might be lacking. And we think, wow, if only we had that talent, or only we had that strength. But the truth behind it is the fact that talent is a starting point. So you could have a great starting point, but without putting effort or discipline and diligence into your talent is basically just that. You will just stay at step one or step two, depending on how hard you work at it. But let's say someone who may be less talented, but have similar strength, but if they put the amount of effort into it, you will see development and progress. And in fact, over time, what you will also see for basically, I think 100% of successful people do possess discipline and diligence. So everyone starts off basically the same. The difference at the end of the day is how much effort you put into something. And in order for you to put that effort in, you need to possess this quality called discipline or self-discipline. And essentially, what is self-discipline? In the most simple term that is defined by Brian Tracy in this book, No Excuses, self-discipline is essentially the ability for you to do something that you need to do, even though you don't want to or you don't feel like doing it. So that to me is like, a really simple way of defining what self-discipline is. So Sal, what are your thoughts around talents and discipline?
That's really a very good question, Lisa. And I like the example and the quote that you give. It kind of reminded me, those days when I was a manager during a hiring process. Because what happened then, of course, I needed to interview people to basically hire them for a specific job. And during this process, I met many type of individuals. And obviously, there are some whom I just talked for a minute or two. I got very excited because I knew that these people got real talent. And I knew that if I hired them, they would definitely perform a good job at what they were supposed to do. And that was pretty obvious. And I've also encountered many individuals whom I really enjoyed having the conversation, going through the process of interviewing them, I knew that they were okay. They were good, right? And I'm pretty sure that if given the effort and if they put really time and sweat into whatever that they were supposed to do, they will end up becoming very successful. But the interesting part that's going through my mind when I encountered these two very different types of individuals, or I get very excited with the talented one really fast. And I knew that, this is a must hire, for instance, right? Well, while it took me quite a long time to kind of think through the second individual who appeared not so talented, but I knew that he or she had potential. So that's just to show the kind of stark contrast between someone who has talent and who doesn't have that much talent, and how it affects our unconscious bias in terms of making some critical hiring decision. So, and the interesting discovery is really based on my experience, the person that is okay or good enough when we hire them and they really put the discipline and the diligence and put efforts into it, they ended up becoming more successful than the talented ones who probably are not disciplined enough. So what's happening here is really the not so talented individuals were very aware of their shortcomings, and they were ready to put that effort in place to make sure that they turn out very well. And of course, as a manager, from my point of view, also I tend to pay a lot more attention to the not so talented ones so that I could coach him or her to make sure that they're successful in their role so that they end up being a good hire. So it kind of works both ways. But I think the important message that I'm trying to share here, Lisa, is that I totally agree that talent alone is not enough. You know, the reason why Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic had been champions of tennis for the longest time ever, not just because of their talents, it's because of their discipline and diligence. And they're being very diligent in terms of whatever needs to be put into to make them successful. So that's from my point of view. So now, Lisa, what's your take on discipline per se?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great example, Sel, with the tennis greats. And I think it's fair to say that they all have talent. But what differentiates all tennis players is not just the talent that they possess, but it's how much effort they put into it. And so, in the same sense, in order for you to put the effort in, you do need discipline. And like I mentioned earlier, from what Brian Tracy mentioned about what is self discipline, which is essentially doing the things that you need to do or should do, even though you don't want to or don't feel like doing it. So, in essence, you can actually break down discipline into three parts. Essentially, it's being able to control yourself to say what, when, and how you're going to achieve your goals. So, for example, if you're a self disciplined person, you would be able to control these three variables. For example, in the when do you reward yourself, or when do you take the easy way out or not? So, basically, the ability for you to self control says, I am going to wait when I achieve this before something else. So I'm willing to wait for the results before getting a quick reward. Because most of the time, self discipline will essentially help you push through what is the easy. Most people give up, or I wouldn't say they give up, but they fall short because they rather take the easy or quick path rather than what they know they need to do that would ultimately get them to their purpose. The second part of discipline, it's about the what. And the what here enables you to control what you do, what your responses would be like depending on what the situation, and how you perceive certain situations. So, for example, if the going gets tough, which will always happen in any project that we do, discipline will basically say, I am still going to continue in the path that I'm going to do, even though it's hard. And I will continue to do what I am able to do, as opposed to saying, oh, no, I can't do it anymore. And the third aspect of discipline is around the how. And we all have goals in our minds that are goals that we need to accomplish. And the key thing about accomplishing any goal is the ability for you to put a plan in place. The how. How do I achieve the goal that I want to achieve? What are the steps do I need to take? And that's where self-control allows you to sit down, organize your thoughts, put in the processes that you need, the structure that you need to review process, assessment process, improvement process, so on and so forth, in order for you to achieve your goals. So one part of it is how do you manage yourself? Essentially, that's what discipline is about. But more importantly, is how do you manage yourself in spite of the difficulties or the challenges or even your internal laziness that you might feel once in a while. So being able to control those variables is key to being a disciplined individual. What about you, Sel? What are your thoughts around discipline?
My thoughts on discipline is I really need to think through this, and I think I'll give an example as when we were children. First and foremost, discipline shapes our character and our pathway to excellence. So that's the reason why when we were children, our parents would basically teach us, to wake up in the morning, brush our teeth, have a shower, and then go to school, study, prepare for exams, everything on the basic foundation of life so that we can function effectively. So that's as a start, like a training ground for us as far as discipline is concerned. And as we go along, we learn that we need to assign a time for each of these tasks or activities. So we started, for instance, school starts at 7:30, so we come at 6, so that we have time to brush our teeth and shower and then take really good breakfast before we go to school so that we be in class by 7:30 a.m., for instance. And then, study, get to know friends, and then do the stuff that, we typically do at school. So slowly, this type of disciplines are nurtured, all right, so that we get, after a while, it becomes a habit. So the way I see discipline, rightly as you mentioned, it takes three different key cornerstone. I would say first is really about managing our mindset, because we need to be able to do things that we have to do, regardless of the kind of temptation that we have, that's trying to get us from doing what we're supposed to do, all right? So that kind of distraction. So simplistically, I would say that discipline is really our ability to focus on what we need to do within a stipulated time frame, regardless the kind of distractions that we have. So you need to be very focused, you need to be clear about the goals, and you need to commit your time at that point in time to just do stuff and complete it. So it is not easy to do. That's the reason why I think the mindset is very critical. And this is the thing that we have been taught from when we were really small, and as we progress, as we go along, then we learn how to basically do that in a very structured manner. Yeah, there are many ways of learning that. So talking about learning, Lisa, do you have any tips on how we can learn and become disciplined?
Yeah, great question, Sal. And I think your example of how it's built up over time, starting from when we were young, and it's exactly what you said. Discipline is something that we need to build over time. And the only way that we can actually build discipline is two things. One is essentially you need to have a clear goal as to why you're going to do what you're going to do, right? So you need to have a clear purpose so that you're able to push yourself through, especially doing the stuff that you don't feel like doing or don't want to do. The second part of it is essentially around like what you basically talk about, let's say learning how to brush your teeth. It's about practice. You got to put it into action. So there is this component of diligence that is required in order for discipline to grow. So essentially, what is diligence? Diligence is essentially hard work. You got to put in the practice hours. You got to put in the time. I mean, a good example is for example, I want to learn how to solve the Rubik's Cube. I can put the time, I can do the research, I can watch, various YouTubers solving the Rubik's Cube in like 34 seconds. I could learn all of this, but if I never put it into practice, I actually have not picked up the skill to be able to solve the Rubik's Cube. So at some point, all the effort needs to translate into actual activities. So in the same way, if we're doing any sort of work, I could read up like a gazillion pieces of information about how to create a marketing campaign. But if I actually never create a marketing campaign, but have all this theoretical information of marketing campaigns, I am still not going to be able to create any marketing campaigns until I've actually done it. And for most of us, that comes with two parts, right? You have to discipline yourself to do it. And then you have to put the hard work in, which is the diligence part, to actually get it done. And over time, as you keep on doing it, your skill sets will improve. So in the same way as you are more experienced in, let's say, creating marketing campaigns, it becomes easier over time because you have developed that skill. And that skill comes through practice, through creating actions that you can repeat, which eventually becomes a habit, and you can establish a consistent routine around it. And so discipline in itself is great. And discipline with diligence is where you get the power of the two D's. And that is what is important. The other thing that we also need to notice is that sometimes some people are very hardworking and very diligent in whatever they do. But we also need to make sure that we need to couple diligence with the ability for you to assess and change as we go along, because improvements need to happen. So for example, if you're hitting yourself against the wall, there is no point continually hitting yourself against the wall and expecting different results. Sometimes you need to change the tools. So you do need to be flexible in how you want to accomplish your goals without hurting yourself too much. But more importantly is that whole process of self-discipline and diligence is a continuous improvement process as we go along. What about you, Sal? What are your experiences around diligence?
That's pretty much like what you said, Lisa. That was such a great explanation, because I can remember very well my experience is really about hiking. My example would be hiking, and this is where really the rubber meets the road. Like you mentioned, theoretically, we know that you, for instance, I know for a fact that I get to train 8 or 12 months before I go hiking, right? But reading it in a book, it sounded very hard, actually. Yeah. And so the thing is, when I wanted to go hiking 8 weeks before, I didn't do 12 weeks before, but I just didn't have the time to do it. So I basically settled with 8 weeks. So 8 weeks before the expedition, I would basically clear my schedule, and my schedule kind of changed totally because I get to commit those time. Yeah, I need to be very focused on what I was trying to achieve. So I get to commit that time. For instance, every evening, it's about strength training in the gym, and every other day, and then in the morning, it's really about cardio training. So I go run and walk and all sorts of stuff. And I practically do this diligently for 8 weeks. And the reason why I was basically inspired to do it because I wanted to make sure that I had a good time when I go hiking, right? And then the key thing here is really I was passionate about it. I enjoyed hiking, so it was probably pretty easy for me to do. I took it as this is a really fun stuff, to even have a more fun time, right? When I did the hiking. So that's basically it. But what I'm trying to say here is, Lisa, the 3 key pointers that you mentioned about having the clarity in terms of knowing your goal and being focused at that, and then preparing yourself to get ready, right? So you put in the time and effort diligently with discipline, right? To ensure that you perform those tasks and execute it to the best of your ability every time of the day. And what you then do is really this process of assessment, self-assessment, assessing yourself. Yeah, how far can you push? Which part did you not really do well? This fear of continuous improvement has got to be there in anything and everything that we do. And the same thing goes during my hiking training, so that the following week we could do something different, for instance. And of course, I always do this with a buddy, which is another friend, or maybe sometimes 4 of us, because we normally go hiking together. And that's another element which can basically keep you motivated and keep you on track in terms of doing what you're trying to do. So yeah, these 3 key pointers are very important, being focused, have clarity on goals, and then perform what you need to do within that specific time frame, adhere to it. And then the third one is really the self-assessment. So I couldn't agree more with you, Lisa, from the perspective of the kind of tips that we need to have to be successful in this. And again, I would like to stress, talent alone is just not enough. We got to be very disciplined, really managing our mindsets, yeah, to make sure that we do what we are supposed to do within the time frame and not get distracted by anything else. Put that time, commit to it. And then, of course, time management and the other skills that I think everybody needs to sharpen up is really about managing priorities. Sometimes we have the tendency to say yes to everything, right? So for instance, this 8 week time frame that I get to prepare for my hiking expedition, of course, I get to say no to a lot of things so that I get to fill in those time with the kind of training that I needed to do. So again, that's something that we really need to learn. But I think inside this point in time, we have said a lot about talent, discipline, and diligence. Maybe you want to summarize the key pointers on how to develop both discipline and diligence for us to be a better version of ourselves.
Yeah, that's great, Sal. Yeah, so just a quick summary. The first part of it is, like what we mentioned, discipline is all about being clear in terms of what we want to accomplish. And with that clarity of what we want to accomplish, we will basically be focused on it, like what you said. And then we'll build a plan around it to ensure that that takes place. And having discipline is also something that requires sustained self-control, which means you need to be able to know how to make certain trade-offs. You need to choose the right and the purpose-driven one versus what is easy and expedient. The second part of it is to to help discipline be something that's powerful, you need diligence. You need to put the work into whatever it is that you need to do. And part of it is, making sure that, like you said, you have time management, you have a review process in place, you're able to keep your eye on the goal. And in all things that we do, practice does not make perfect, but practice makes permanence. So we do need to put into action what we know and what we know we need to do. And lastly, I think it's like what Sal has mentioned, it's all about continuous learning. How do we continuously improve from what we have done in order to make sure that, that improvement cycle is always there? There is no point doing something if it's not going to be fruitful or if it's not going to lead to the goals that you want to accomplish. And in all of this, we would like to encourage everyone to just take a look at simple steps of discipline. All of us, I think, has certain levels of discipline, or else we wouldn't be able to survive in this world. But what we do need is to realize that self-discipline is not something that we take for granted. It is something that we can actually build over time, along with diligence. And don't take it for granted, but look at it as a key attribute that will help you propel you to a direction that you want to go, to be successful, to achieve goals, and to accomplish whatever it is that you are looking out to accomplish. And so once again, thank you very much for taking the time to listen. I hope that you've learned at least one thing that you're able to apply into your everyday.